been lingering for a while, in fact, since the beginning of the year. The country's largest steel producer, ArcelorMittal South Africa, is pressing ahead with plans to shut down its long steel operations by the end of September, a move that places thousands of jobs at immediate risk. Despite government interventions, the company says the closures are unavoidable. Let's speak now to Dr. Saul Levin, who is Director of Trade and Industry Policy Strategies, that's known as TIPS, to unpack what this means for jobs, local industry, and the broader steel sector in the country. Doc, good afternoon, and thank you for your time. So this closure has been deferred twice at least since it was first mooted in 2023, and initially it was meant to have happened by the end of January. Then it was deferred. Then some funding was provided by the IDC. And government also was speaking about being in what is known as, in the words of Pakistau, firefighting mode to try and save the operations and the associated jobs. What do we know about why all of these interventions don't seem to have worked, such that we find ourselves at this spot with an imminent closure at the end of September?
So the closure that we're looking at in September is the Newcastle operation of AMSA. And the problems there are that there's a few things that are happening simultaneously. One is there's low demand for steel in South Africa. It comes off the back of fairly low growth in the economy, and low growth means low demand for a whole range of products, including steel. The second one is that there has been an increase in imports of steel, so that does put some of the already difficult situation, making it a bit worse. And then the other thing is that there's more producers. So what's happened is over the last few years, there are what we call smaller operations called mini mills that have set up operations, and these mini mills primarily use scrap steel, as well as some other virgin steel, but those operations have put more steel into the market. So it's a bad combination of things for the AMSA Newcastle plant, which means that they are likely to be closing.
Are we able to gauge the amount of difference that the intervention of the IDC and government concerted efforts to try and support ArcelorMittal, the amount of difference that it's been able to make, other than just deferring by 6 months from the beginning of the year to where we are now?
It's been a very difficult situation for all of those reasons. But the 6 months did give the companies that the AMSA operation supplied an opportunity to, build up some stock, to put in place their plan Bs. It did seem likely, even when that 6 months extension was given, that it may not make it beyond that 6 months. But what it meant was that particularly because the downstream industry, like the automotive sector and other sectors, need the steel from that Newcastle operation. And there's something called specialty steels that can't be produced at the moment by some of these mini mills. So what we see then is the operation there was able to give a buffer. The state did have to pay for that, but the likelihood of that continuing beyond September, given all of these difficult factors, and then you also compound it with the problems with Transnet, the problems with electricity, the high price of electricity, the high price of rail, the difficulty of using the road network. So, there were some comments made by the AMSA operations, the CEO today in the paper, complaining about these things. But these things have been a problem for a while now, and all of these things have put this plant at risk. But there are other operations of AMSA that are still viable, and it's up to AMSA to see how they want to move forward on that, because we still need steel.
Yeah, and it might feel like I'm hammering the same point, Doc, but I think it's important that we highlight it sufficiently. You have, in the last few minutes, listed the factors that are at play, but I'm just wondering, how much of those factors are self-inflicted wounds? And what do you say of the ability or otherwise to have the antidote for those self-inflicted wounds? For instance, what's the conversation about the downstream economic activity that has led us to this point?
These are big challenges for the country. So not only for AMSA, we're seeing a lot of operations. So in ferrochrome, for example, there are mills that have closed down. They can't cope with the very high electricity price. They can't cope with the problems that they're facing on the transport side. So all of these things are a big challenge for a range of industries, and that they do need to be addressed by the government, because it doesn't work to have industry closing down. The problem for the downstream industry is they can't import all of the steel that's needed. So we do need steel to be made in this country, and you do need to find ways of making sure that that's provided cost effectively. Otherwise, on the downstream side, we then end up importing things that we could make locally. The other problem then we have is our ports are already pretty congested. And you've got a problem there where we may not even be able to import some of these things that we need as raw products or inputs for other downstream industries. So making sure that we have steel working effectively is a priority, but it's not it doesn't mean that there are no solutions. Some of the solutions may sit in Zimbabwe, for example, that has they've also got the iron ore, they've got the coking coal. They've got investment from Chinese, and they may come in and say, South Africa, you can't do this cost effectively. We can supply your primary steel. And they're already eyeing the South African market. These things are already at play. And they may come in with lower cost steel, then we can import,
Sure.
deep sea imports. And it means that maybe the Zimbabwe economy grows as a result of this.
Dr. Levin, as fate would have it, by the time we're talking about this closure of these operations, these long steel operations, particularly the Newcastle one that you are alluding to at the end of September, as fate would have it, that will coincide, I imagine, with the beginnings of us feeling the pinch of the Trump tariffs in other productive sectors of the economy, our automotive sector out in the Eastern Cape under a great deal of distress, the agricultural sector also under a great deal of distress, and also issues of job losses in those sectors. Those two sectors compounded by what we're talking about as far as AMSA is concerned. What would be the best way to respond to what seems to be a crisis right at our doorstep in terms of when it will start to materialize?
Yeah, there's a lot of things that are more than just headwinds. I think they are critical for the export sector. It does mean we're going to have to urgently prioritize finding new markets, but a lot of other countries are going to have to do that. The government has already been in locked in negotiations with the US administration trying to resolve the deal that the Trump administration was looking for. Nothing came to fruition by the time he announced the tariffs. They're obviously still going to try hard to try and get that resolved, so that as soon as possible we're not going to escape tariffs, but we can at least get a lower tariffs. But the priority then must be, what are the new sectors that we need to start driving, particularly around the green industries? And there's been a lot of talk about that over the last couple of months, to say we need to make sure that we drive these new sectors. We've got the minerals, our neighboring countries have the minerals. Let's find ways of getting those industries going, and start to make the batteries or assemble the batteries, start to do the new energy vehicles, and start to look at the other green technologies that are needed. But there's also other opportunities that the government needs to push really hard. Things like in the services sector, for example, business processing or call centers, or other IT related sectors. So there's a few things that can be done
Sure.
and will have to be done to make sure that we don't end up with an even worse jobs crisis as a result of the closure of these heavy industries.
Yeah, it seems to me to be one of those that can be considered a burning platform, right, in terms of the impact, the likely impact, should these job losses materialize. Dr. Saul Levin is director at the Trade and Industry Policy Strategies, that is known as TIPS, joining us and talking about the situation at ArcelorMittal South Africa.